All right, I think it's time. So, good evening, everyone. Good evening from, at least for those of us here on this side of the Pacific. I'm here in Beijing, and good morning to those of you who are in the United States. It is absolutely a delight to be with you here today for our discussion on From Classroom to Commerce, the value of Chinese students to American business. I know many people, when they frame and they think of the idea of Chinese students in the United States, they think of it just in terms of the soft power and the influence. But I think, as all of us know, while there's an important soft power angle to it, it becomes much more important to American hard power, American commercial power. And so our discussion today comes at a critical time for US-China educational exchange. So we at USCBC, every year we publish reports where we quantify US exports. We quantify them by type, by state, by congressional district, and by product. And I think for a lot of folks, they think that our top service export might be something related to tech, or it might be internet services, or it might be finance. But in point of fact, or even tourism, our number one export in services is education. And so in 2024 alone, Chinese students contributed nearly $15 billion to the US economy and supported 143,000 American jobs. But for those of us who really look at this issue, we know that it goes beyond tuition dollars. Students, Chinese students, particularly those in STEM fields like engineering and quantum computing, represent really vital talent, a vital talent pipeline for American innovation and global competitiveness. And the sad truth is, or maybe it's the happy truth, is that in many fields, American innovation is powered by foreign talent trained in our universities. Foreign-born talent is the lifeblood of Silicon Valley. It is the power behind the U.S. life science industry, and foreign students really are the secret sauce to American innovation and year in and year out to American global competitiveness. And so, as the bilateral environment becomes more complex, the stakes of preserving this pipeline grow even higher. So I just cannot say how happy I am that we're able to partner with the U.S.-China Education Trust to look at these themes in more depth, and to be joined by an amazing group of panelists that represent academic, policy, and the education service communities. So today we have Omar Chihane, the TOEFL General Manager from ETS, the Educational Testing Service. We have Amy Gadsden, the Executive Director of Penn China Initiatives and Associate Vice Provost for Global Initiatives at the University of Pennsylvania, and Yanzhong Huang, the Director of the Center for Global Health Studies at Seton Hall University and a Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. But before we begin the discussion, I'm going to turn the floor over, or I guess I'm going to turn the screen over to Ambassador Julia Chang Block. She's the Executive Chair and founder of USCET. She has long been a champion of people-to-people exchange between the US and China, and so we're just honored to co-host today's program with her. As many of you know, I met Ambassador Block for the first time, goodness, at least a decade and a half ago. And I remember even then, I remember thinking, we're all in the education field. A lot of people talk about, the famous quote by Steve Jobs, where he says, our job is to make a dent in the universe, or else why are we here? And I appreciate the sentiment about making a significant impact on the world. But I remember once making a dent in my dad's car, and that didn't work out very well for me. So what I would like to think of that Julia has done, or I'm sorry, that Ambassador Chang has done, isn't so much as make a dent in the universe, but she has polished the universe and has made it a slightly more beautiful place, particularly in the area of US-China educational exchange. And she was there early and did it first 27 years ago when she founded USCET. So, Julia, thank you very much for your contributions, and we very much look forward to your welcoming remarks. Let me hand the screen over to you.
John, thank you for that very generous introduction. Let me just add my welcome to this USCBC and USEC collaboration in bringing everyone today this terrific panel to discuss classroom to commerce, the value of US-China education exchange. I want to re-emphasize the staggering fact that Shan has just shared with us. America's top service export is not tech or finance. It's education. Yes, you heard us right. It's education. The U.S.-China Business Council's newly released 2025 export report found spending by Chinese students and their families in the United States amounted to 14.4 billion in 2023. That's worth repeating. Nearly 30% of all U.S. education exports worldwide. Education, and I repeat, education, is the single largest U.S. service export to China and supports more than 143,000 U.S. jobs. That's also worth repeating. Ladies and gentlemen, that's more than oil and gas, semiconductors, and aerospace sales to China combined. As Sean said, dollars matter, yes, but the dividend is far greater. Roughly 277,000 students from China studied in the United States in the 2023-24 academic year, forming lifelong friendships, building professional networks, and feeding the talent pipelines that power American research and innovation. International students, and Chinese students in particular, fill STEM jobs too, enrich classrooms, launch startups, and create businesses, all kinds of businesses. They are central to U.S. competitiveness, from AI and semiconductors to energy and advanced manufacturing. Fully 83% of the Chinese PhDs stayed to work in the U.S., making possible America's leadership and dominance in technology. One question for today's panel is how much longer will the 83% stay with America under the current circumstances? As Sean said, our discussion today couldn't come at a more critical moment. The United States stands at a crossroad where we must carefully navigate national security concerns and educational openness. Restrictions on international student visas have created new challenges, and educational openness is in peril. With recent announcements that the U.S. will aggressively revoke visas for Chinese students, I repeat, we are sharpening debate on how to protect research and intellectual property without undermining the academic freedom and openness that have long attracted the best and brightest from around the world, particularly China, to study in the U.S. American higher education has been a beacon for global talent. Another question for the panel is just how vital this global talent has been to the American economy and research capacity and general well-being. As the U.S. government cracks down on open education exchange with China amidst national security concerns, do we fully understand the consequences? By all accounts, we are driving China's best and brightest to return home or move to study where they feel welcome. The best and brightest, ladies and gentlemen, have choices. When will Chinese students and their families lose their passion for an American education? And when America loses this talent pipeline? It will, if we don't change. Will we not only give up near-term dollars and jobs, but also lose our long-term innovation, competitive edge, soft power, and global leadership? This is another question for today's panel, for me anyway. I learned the value of education exchange very early. I come from a family in which a generation earlier, a Boxer Indemnity Scholarship enabled my father to study at Harvard University and become the first Chinese graduate from Harvard Law School. He will return home to help modernize China with his Harvard education. But he will remain a lifelong devotee of Harvard and America. I am an American citizen because of this. USED is proud to partner with USCBC to host today's program because we have seen time and again that human relationships help stabilize the broader bilateral relationship. We know that classrooms and commerce are inseparable. Education exports generate revenues today, and they will generate further strategic dividends tomorrow. Can you think of a better way to do well by doing good? Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure now to hand over the mic to my friend, Sean Stein, President of the U.S.-China Business Council, who will moderate today's program and introduce our panelists. I've seen Sean in action as Consul General in Shenyang and then in Shanghai. USCBC, you are very fortunate to have him as president at this critical time, just as USED is fortunate that he has seen firsthand how education exchange translates into commercial opportunity and strategic understanding. I can think of no one better to lead us in our discussion today. Sean, all yours.
Great. Thank you very much. I thought you did an extraordinary job of framing this. I think you said it very, very clearly. Many people think of this in terms of just tuition dollars, but foreign students are much more than tuition dollars. I think you said the stakes are innovation and competitiveness, and the stakes are global leadership. And those are important, incredibly important stakes. And so the United States needs to get this right. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to turn to our panelists to help us do a little bit of level setting, if we can. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to start with Omar. Omar, ETS has got insight into the pipeline of students that are coming and where they're going and all of this in a way that I think no one else in the world has. Would very much like to hear sort of, we'd like to have your help sort of framing, where are we, where are we going, and what do you see happening?
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Sean, for this incredible opportunity. I think, as everyone has mentioned so far, education is one of America's most powerful exports. And when we're talking about 143,000 jobs, that's from university research to local cafes and college towns. At TOEFL, we view international students as partners in global progress. So our mission is to open doors and break barriers to opportunity. For more than 60 years, TOEFL has been trusted academic English credentials for students coming from the US, used by over 13,000 institutions in 160 countries, including every major US university. Over the past 60 years, we've supported millions of Chinese learners who use TOEFL not just to gain admission, but access a lifetime of educational and career possibilities. So while the US remains the most popular destination for TOEFL test takers in China, and of course, China being our largest market, TOEFL, we're observing a very distinct shift. More students are applying to multiple destinations, hedging their bets. So not just the US, but Canada, the UK, Australia, increasingly now Asia and Europe, and the Middle East. This diversification isn't just about geopolitics. It reflects really a desire for certainty, for respect, and future opportunity. The US still holds a prestige advantage, but it can't rely on reputation alone. Students are watching how welcome they feel. I mean, those are not just students making those decisions, but their parents. How pathways are communicated and how connected the degrees are to workforce opportunity. And what's at stake here is really the loss of Chinese students, not only an institutional challenge, it's really a national one. You were mentioning about STEM talent pipeline. 54% of international students are concentrated in STEM. It diminishes the innovation ecosystem. Many of today's entrepreneurs, engineers, researchers in the US began their journey with TOEFL score. It weakens America's soft power and global competitiveness at a time when talent is really borderless. And, you know, we're at ETS, we're really modernizing how we support institutions. We launch tools like TOEFL Access that's data-driven, really helping them identify and engage global talent and really kind of getting universities closer to the talent. We're evolving our tests to be fairer and more modern and more accessible. And most importantly, we're really standing up for principles that language proficiency should be a bridge, not a barrier to opportunity. And I think our most important message here, however, is the US must rebuild trust. It starts with clarity, clear admission pathways, clear post-study opportunities, and a clear message that really says to students, you're welcome here.
Thank you, Omar. Yeah, I think that you hit on some really important themes. A big part of that is we need to rebuild trust and ensure that students, when they look at the possibility of studying in the US, that there is a pipeline into either jobs or research or other types of positions. You made me think of something as you were talking about students hedging their bets. Usually I'm really I only write a handful of letters of recommendation for students to go to college every year. Unless I know the student quite well, I refuse to do the letter. Last year, earlier this year, was the first time I've ever had students ask me to not just write letters for American universities, but for universities in Canada or in Australia. And that had never happened to me before. So I do think you're absolutely right that we're at risk of losing some of the best and brightest. So thank you. And Amy, may I turn to you? I would love to hear a bit more on how do institutions see this and to get your view on the issues.
Sure. Thank you, Sean. Thank you to the U.S. China Education Trust and the U.S. China Business Council for hosting this webinar and for including me on this panel. So how do universities see these issues? I work for a 300-year-old institution in the United States. We are, at our core, focused on research and teaching, and we do that by recruiting the best students and the best faculty from around the world to deliver the educational programs and to do the research innovation work that has made the University of Pennsylvania and so many American universities so successful in the world. When we started, we were a small institution in a colony in Pennsylvania, and we had local talent that came to us to study. Over the last 300 years, we've expanded the reach of our institution, right? So we went from a regional institution, a city-based institution, to an institution that could recruit talent from, a broader section of the United States, to a national institution where we have scholars and students coming from across the country, to now really for the last 50 or 60 years, a global institution. To succeed, all American R1 universities, research universities, to succeed, we need to be able to recruit the best talent from around the world, and that is both students and faculty. I think we are not reflecting enough in these kinds of conversations on how this impacts the many foreign-born faculty that we have, people who were born abroad, maybe had their first degree abroad, came to the United States or went elsewhere in the world, acquired advanced degrees, and are now naturalized U.S. citizens on our faculty. So for us to do what we do, to deliver on the promise of higher education in the United States, we need to be able to continue to recruit that talent. I often say to colleagues, if we were having this discussion around the private sector, and this is a private sector audience with the U.S. China Business Council, how would we be shaping this if we were telling American companies where they could or couldn't sell their products, right? It would be, we would use a scalpel probably to have that conversation, hopefully. And I think the same is true here. We need a scalpel to have this conversation, not a sledgehammer. And unfortunately, what we've had to date is a sledgehammer, right? Aggressively, as Ambassador Changblock referenced, aggressively revoking visas. um, putting into place policies that aren't clear for students and their families in terms of understanding the risks that they might encounter instead of the United States. So when I think about how we see this, we see it as a critical issue for us. I can tell you this has been a summer like no other in terms of how we are working with students and trying to help them navigate an incredibly uncertain visa landscape. We see it as critical to our mission. So I really appreciated that Omar talked about the importance of signaling to students from around the world. And I work with students from around the world. This is not just a China problem at this point. Signaling to them that the United States is still open to international students, that the United States is still welcoming of international students. It's something that we have taken on as a key mission in terms of our efforts as a campus. Um, and we see this, and I think this is something that is important to have in this conversation too. We're talking a lot about competition in technology, competition in AI. Chinese students study everything. They are not solely studying AI. They are not solely studying quantum physics. They study everything. They study politics. They study literature. They study art. They study design. They study education policy. And we are at a real risk if, they study public. I'm looking at Yanzhong Huang on this call. If we run a real risk if we sort of, narrowly talk about Chinese students as if they are solely focused on one set of issues and educational programs, and that, somehow that is what, they're being sort of trained to study or pushed to study, and then somehow taking that knowledge back. We slip into an argument that simply isn't true. There are 277,000 Chinese students in the United States, 1.1 million international students in the United States. They are in every discipline and every program. And if we have concerns about specific programs, and I know we're going to get into this later in the conversation, we should highlight and be clear what those programs are, but we should not tarnish or somehow make assumptions about why Chinese students are in the United States in a way that undermines the real richness of their intellectual interests.
Yeah. Thanks, Amy. I think that's really an important point about the stereotypes that I think are really damaging that people have about foreign students, but about Chinese students in particular. And something I neglected to do that I should have done on the top, Amy, is I wanted to thank you for your leadership and you, Penn's leadership, where you have some of the most innovative programs right now with China of any of the universities that we deal with. And I can tell you personally that some of the students that you have trained are now on my staff and they're brilliant. So thank you for what you do. Next, I'd like to go to Yanzhong Huang from Seton Hall to talk about to help us again level set, because I think you're the one of us on the panel that was a foreign student in the United States. So I think you can talk about this from both a personal level and an institutional level, as well as what does it mean for competitiveness. So let me go to you, Yanzhong, if that's okay.
Well, thank you, Sean. Well, thanks also to CSCBC and USCT for inviting me to this timely panel. And well, in terms of the international education, I'm not an expert, but I can say I'm a specimen and also a beneficiary of the U.S.-China educational exchange. I note my desire to study in America when I was studying at Hopkins Nanjing Center. That was the first joint academic joint venture between U.S. and China. It was more than 30 years ago. At the Hopkins Nanjing Center, I obtained a friendship, with my American classmates. They started the 3 decades of friendship, with the American students and staff there, and such. Some of them are in audience today. I also it essentially is like where my dream started because um, the American professors there, wrote me recommendations, letters, so I could, study in American university. I received full scholarship. I'm really grateful to the generosity, this country, and American people. And in the U.S. Universities, I gained critical thinking skills. I was exposed to multiple perspectives, which I found extremely important when I'm now, like trying to sort of contribute to U.S.-China dialogue and use what I learned to inform U.S. policymakers, U.S.-China policy. I remember it was like before I came to this country at a meeting with visiting U.S. congressional delegation. I was just like any nationalist Chinese students. I think that was right after the Rodney King incident, Los Angeles, 1986. Basically I challenged them, say, how could you comment on our country's human rights record? Your country is the human rights, record is so bad, So it's that kind, but only when I came to this country, I learned what this the importance of exposure to the multiple perspectives to adopt a critical thinking this approach to study U.S.-China relations, to study China. So it was sad to see how the Chinese students today sort of no longer feel welcome, because as one leading China scholar pointed out, like decades ago when they came to the country, where they feel very much welcome, but now the Chinese students, they feel like they're worried about being, like put into this so-called the little dark rooms or, interrogation rooms by to be questioned, on their purpose of, studying in the U.S., and so, we have seen, but this dramatic change, the landscape of U.S.-China educational exchange, unfortunately, is, eh, could be in the right direction. Over.
Thanks, Yanzhong. I really appreciate the personal sort of insight that you bring to this. So thank you for joining us. I want to dive right into some of the topics. I think Ambassador Block gave us, I think, some tall marching orders, and she asked some really pertinent questions. And the one that stuck with me the most was she said, "How vital are international students?" And so, if we can dive into that a little bit, I want to look at that in a couple of ways. Amy, you talked a little bit about how vital international students and faculty are for the university, for being, globally competitive. But I'd like to expand this to not just the university, but what role do foreign students and researchers play in driving U.S. innovation? How do they affect the pace and direction of innovation and competitiveness? And how do universities fit into that? What does all of this mean if we lose access to Chinese students? Can I turn to you, Amy, to expand a little bit on where you were going with that before?
Sure. So, I'm just trying to, I don't, the example I always point to, I'm a qualitative historian, not a quantitative analyst, right? The example I point to on our own campus, Catalin Carrico, who won the Nobel Prize recently with Drew Weissman for discovering the mRNA technology that led to the COVID vaccine and is really expanding the forefront of medicine, came to the United States as a visiting scholar from Hungary, I believe. That's a direct line to understanding kind of what does it mean for us to be able to draw international talent from around the world to our campuses, right? We live in a dynamic kind of intellectual ecosystem on a campus. Students are constantly learning from each other. Their faculty are constantly learning from each other. It's like I said, I mean, we succeed. America has 23, I believe, of the top 50 universities in the world on the, according to various rankings in the United States. We are by far the country with the most number of universities on any top list, any top ranking list in the world. The UK has 3 in the top 10. China doesn't even break the top 10 between Tsinghua and Beida. We are really sitting in an advantageous position, and we're playing very dangerously with something that is, clearly a head and shoulders kind of, industry for the United States, an industry that is head and shoulders above any other, comparative industry around the world. We're ceding ground here. And it seems unnecessary to me. It seems like there are a lot of issues at stake in terms of the U.S. federal government, the federal government's relationship with higher education. But we can address those issues even as we maintain the excellence on our campuses, which include international students and international scholars.
Thanks, Amy. I can see Yanzhong was nodding along to some of that. Yanzhong, would you like to comment?
Um, I, I probably would like to just not focus just the beneficial, right, the benefits of the international exchange, but also I think it helps for us to unravel some of the myths, right, in terms of the international educational exchange. I think now one of the biggest problem is that we over securitized, right, the U.S.-China educational exchange. Now, the Chinese students, now they are portrayed more as a security threat, then a contributor, right, to U.S. global leadership, right, to the U.S. economy, right. I think this is the myth, that we need to unravel, as Amy say, right. The Chinese students come here, right? They study many things, right? They not just AI, not just high tech, right? And many students come here, right, to study, not to sabotage. Right? They come here to contribute, right, to our the international innovative capabilities, right? They're not to spy on us, So I think it is important, right, to sort of the avoid portraying all the Chinese students as national security or even a cultural threat to the U.S. And unfortunately, that kind of stereotyping is also sort of feeding into the Chinese government's narrative, right? The the unnecessary necessity to study in the U.S. Right, there's some even right also right the portrayed or like Chinese students who return to China after they finish their studies as spies. This is the you have seen sort of like this the a vicious cycle going on. That is in no country's benefit interest.
Thank you, Yanzhong. We're going to go back to that topic a little bit more in just a moment. I think you raised some important issues with national security. Before we do, let me go to Omar for just a moment to talk more about the competitiveness angle.
Yeah, I mean, all of the data that we've and all the research we've done over the years suggests that the U.S. Was still the preferred destinations for all international students. And the number one reason by a mile is post-study work opportunities, which is essentially post-study contribution to the economy. The long-term risk is scary, but it's actually quite simple. Is talent goes elsewhere, like in Canada, like US and Australia, and the US loses its competitive edge.
Yeah, one of the things that being at sort of an association like the U.S.-China Business Council is we had a roundtable in June with a number of our CEOs, and we had a lot of issues on the agenda, and students and foreign talent was not one of them. But yet that became the most hotly discussed topic where whether the company was involved in tech, whether it was semiconductors, whether it was life science and medical devices or pharmaceuticals or advanced manufacturing or even services in consulting and accounting, all of them came together and were like, yeah, and here's this other problem. And that is so much of what we do and what gives us our edge is the best and the brightest go to colleges in the US, and we're able to access that talent. And then that makes us competitive in the US. And then as we go abroad, it helps us be competitive there. So what really struck me is when we were talking about a broad set of issues that affect US business and US companies on their own, this is where the CEOs went, is just how important foreign students, foreign researchers, foreign talent is to keeping America competitive and keeping America's global leadership, global economic leadership. And so the really important issue. But so with that, I want to go back to what Yanzhong was talking about a minute ago, and that was the securitization. One of the things that really sort of we see in this particular moment in American history is it seems that everything about China is national security these days. So trade is national security. Technology is national security. People-to-people exchange, national security. Subnational relations, national security. Economic flows, national security. Investment, national security. And now even students are national security. I think if I were to sit here with a whiteboard and draw a Venn diagram where you have a great big circle that is the full scope of US-China relations, and then you have another circle of that diagram that is US-China relations where people say national security is implicated, that would be most of the circle. And then you have this little tiny circle where it's not, which I think is not the actual reality.
There's a Labubu in that tiny circle.
Yes, right. And so I think there's some real fundamental inaccuracies there. But national security is an issue that we do need to sort of grapple with. I know when I first met Ambassador Bloch, goodness, 15 years ago, in rural China up in the Northeast, that was a different era. Now things are in a different place. And so what I'd kind of like to sort of delve into a little bit is, what is possible in this space? How should we balance national security concerns with values like openness and innovation and global leadership? And frankly, how big are these national security concerns? Or is this really just sort of a matter of sort of hyping up a problem that's bigger than it is? Let me see, who would like to go first? Yanzhong, do you want to go first because you
Sure.
raised this
Since
topic?
I brought up this thing, I'm not denying that we should not vet some of the Chinese students, right?
Mhm.
I'm supporting like a more nuanced approach, right? That avoids what the Chinese called by 一刀切 or blanket policies, right?
Yeah.
Portraying all the Chinese students as security at risk, right? Because we need to right, not all Chinese students here are actually study matters that have security implications, and B, right, that we need to preserve the benefits of the educational exchange. So I think it's important to implement some rigorous but transparent, right, vetting for Chinese students, in sensitive, STEM fields like AI, quantum computing, right? We did make sure this process is transparent and institutionalized, right? Focusing, right, the scrutiny on high risk areas without the broad bans, and expand in the meantime, the non-sensitive collaboration in fields like again, like my field, public health, right, sustainability, right, social sciences, cultural studies, well, security risks minimal, right? Then this And in the meantime, we need to promote reciprocal exchange, right? Given this imbalance, right? Students, study in both countries, so I think given that now we only have several, maybe 1,000 students in China, and while in the meantime there are like 270K students in this country, but this imbalance needs to be changed. And in the meantime, also support the idea, right, of the like pre-departure programs, that teach students, on the need, right, to obey the rule of law, right, respect, multiple different opinions, to sort of balancing what this government, right, these indoctrination programs, to Chinese students when they are leaving the country.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up some of those issues, Yanzhong. You know, one of the things that happens when you work in the State Department like I did is you spend a number of years as a visa officer. And so I personally have probably adjudicated, I don't know, tens of thousands of student visas over the years back when I was a young diplomat. And I remember meeting with some university administrators, and we did have some universities that were not like UPenn and not like Seton Hall, who did view Chinese students simply as a number, as sort of tuition dollars. I think they're in the minority, but that I think is sort of an issue. And so I'm glad that you brought up the importance of having pre-departure briefings and having orientation for students and having support networks for Chinese students so they can better adapt to the American environment and to ensure that they enjoy an atmosphere that allows them to engage in sort of free inquiry and other types of things. So I do think that that is a real issue that I think there's some best practices that universities could learn from one another. But I think overall, I think the analogy that you used, Amy, earlier about using a sledgehammer when we need a scalpel, I think that some of the risks really are much better attacked with a scalpel than with a sledgehammer. But can I turn to you, Amy, back to talk about how you see sort of we balance these sort of national security risks and other issues?
Absolutely. So, so first off, I think that we have to be honest, that this is an issue that both sides need to look at, right? To the extent I have no knowledge of this, I do not adjudicate visas. I do not work for the Chinese government, but to the extent that the Chinese government does see students as a potential means of pulling back information into China in a way that is not in a transparent way, or not in concert with the way academic knowledge is typically shared, right? To the extent that they are potentially using students or identifying students as a means of conducting espionage in the United States, the Chinese side needs to look at that, right? They need to make sure that that is something that they are not jeopardizing students with I believe Yanzhong sort of alluded to the concerns about transnational repression. That's something I'm much more familiar with, as someone who's worked in human rights over the years, as someone who's worked on a college campus over the years, right? That jeopardizes this enterprise as much as anything that the United States is doing. I hope that, whatever conversations are taking place on the Chinese side, they're similarly recognizing that if they see students as a vehicle for conducting espionage in the United States, they are putting at risk this entire enterprise. And David Zweig, who's written a great book about Chinese talent programs, sort of alludes to that. And I think the parallels are here, right? That with the acceleration of talent programs, from the mid 2000s on, and the means and scale at which the Chinese side was using these talent programs to draw people back, they really put at risk a lot of the educational exchange and scholarly exchange. And so that's on the Chinese side. On the US side, similarly, like I said, we cannot use a sledgehammer to deal with what is a very kind of precise set of issues and questions. So I have tried to look at the number of student sort of, F1 prosecutions under the China Initiative when it was active. There were very, very few issues involving students that were prosecuted by the China Initiative. By far, the threat was corporate espionage, an issue that I'm sure your audience knows quite well, right? So when, even when we had a spotlight, all of these questions under a microscope, when the Justice Department, was actively engaged with the China Initiative, the number of student prosecutions was very, very few. There was an incident in Michigan recently that looked much more like a Keystone Cops operation than a sophisticated cyber espionage investigation. There were a number of researchers who, are listed as kind of cases in the China Initiative where they failed, mostly for failure to disclose information on visa application forms having to do with being affiliated with hospitals that were part of the military. So when I don't have access to anything that might be classified when it comes to this, obviously, but when you look at the public record and try and figure out, what is the real threat from students and scholarly exchange, you don't find a lot of evidence. It's just, at least in the public record, it's not there. So when I think about this question of national security and higher education, I think we're not talking about the real problem, which is that the United States has a knowledge gap. We don't necessarily have a national security problem when it comes to international students, but we do have a knowledge gap. We don't produce enough students, enough STEM talent to fill the seats that we have and that we need to be competitive in the world. So we are dependent on international students from around the world. We are dependent on international students from China, from India, from elsewhere, not for their tuition dollars, but for their intellectual capabilities. So how do we close that knowledge gap, right? That's what we should be talking about, not national security. We should close that knowledge gap by investing in education in the United States. We should close that knowledge gap, and this is something that both President Trump and President Biden have said, by keeping these international students in the United States. Both President Trump and President Biden have said they would like to staple green cards to PhD diplomas. I wish it were that easy, right? I could just take my stapler and do that. But let's focus on keeping this international talent in the United States. Not sending it home. I mean, like I said, the national security issue isn't there, but the knowledge gap issue is real. And we're not doing enough to talk about that.
And Amy, I can tell you that not only do you wish we could do that, and do the last couple of presidents wish we could do that, I can tell you that our CEOs wish they could do that as well. They wish they could take the newly minted PhDs from various fields around the US and stamp in a green card because again, that's a really key issue for so many of our companies. Can I turn to you, Omar?
Yeah, sure. I mean, ultimately, those are not, national security and security and openness are not mutually exclusive, right? We need to and we can do both. I think, and I'll cite an anecdotal data set that I saw on X. So do with it what you please. But apparently, citing a anonymous source coming from Meta, that 50% of Meta's researchers and superintelligence are from China. 75% are first generation immigrants. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, if probably the topic of AI being a key to national security across the globe. And if that is accurate, there's obviously a great deal of contribution that international students are doing to secure that for the U.S. So I think that there's those are not mutually exclusive subjects, and I think both should and can coexist.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the AI issue. I was on a panel in Beijing last March where, I'm sorry, I was watching a panel. I was not on the panel. I was watching a panel on AI. And it was interesting because we had folks in from Silicon Valley, we had leading Chinese firms, we had researchers in AI. So it was a very diverse group. And one of the things that came out during that discussion as they were talking about the programs in both countries, was everyone sort of agreed that, in fact, one way of looking at the race for primacy in AI was one of the Chinese researchers said, really, we see this as the Chinese researching AI in China versus the Chinese researching AI in the US. Well, actually, I think the US has a little bit of an edge because not only do we have Chinese researchers in the US working in US firms on AI, but also from India and Korea and many other countries as well, which gives us a bit of an edge. But I do think that you're absolutely right that there's that incredible need. And I thought, Amy, you're introducing this idea of this sort of knowledge gap and the skills gap is one that we really do need to figure out how to grapple with in the US. As we were talking, I remembered something that I saw on Twitter, on X, that came out from the American Embassy. The American Embassy has got a very active Twitter feed. And to me, I thought this really sort of captured, I think, one of for me, it encapsulates some of the misperceptions or some of the myths that are there. And I hesitate to hold this up to the screen because no one's going to be able to read it. But I went and I found the tweet. If anyone can read that, it's backwards. It says, every visa adjudication is a national security decision. And this was the message that went out from the US Embassy to, I guess, all of the sort of visa applicants. And so that's not a message of we want you, we welcome you. That seems to be that's a message that should be an internal message, not an external message. And so let me give a chance to the audience. If anyone wants to put a question in the chat, we can do that. Otherwise, I've got a whole bunch more that I'd like to ask. I can't see the Q&As. Okay, I've got the Q&As. Give me 1 second. Okay. Let me see. Okay, we've got a great question that I'll throw to all of the speakers to potentially answer. And that is, how do you advise businesses to navigate these complex policy considerations, particularly the implications of more constrained international student pipeline while advocating for their own talent needs? Is there advice that we have that we can give to businesses? And maybe I can expand on that to ask the question of what can businesses do to be more effective in this space? How can we advocate more effectively? Do we have any thoughts from members of the panel?
If nobody wants
Go
to
ahead.
be,
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, I was.
Amy, you can be the first. It's okay. Yeah.
So, I think the business community, needs to, I mean, just as the university community is, I mean, we are a business, right? I mean, we're sort of talking about universities and businesses as if they're separate things, but we too are a business. I mean, there was a question posed about the actual economic value. I think we talked about that a little bit in terms of the dollars that, so every $120,000 spent by an international student is one job. I mean, that's one statistic, right? And Sean, I think you mentioned, it's $43 billion of export revenue generated by international students in the United States. I don't have it broken down by China, but that's the overall number. I know you referenced it earlier. We are advocating for the importance of of international students of continuing to bring this talent in. Another statistic that I like to share: 47% of MIT's faculty is foreign born. Right, that's one of our top. R1 universities producing some of the greatest innovations and insights at the cutting edge of science. Roughly 50% of the faculty members on that campus were foreign born. So we need to continue to advocate for that talent, just like we would advocate for American competitiveness in manufacturing, in automobile innovation, in biotech, whatever the field is, right? We would want the United States to be at the top of that, leading that effort, top competitive enterprise. So I think if, businesses can speak out just as they did in terms of extending STEM OPT and formalizing STEM OPT. I mean, business played a huge role in ensuring that OPT was kind of institutionalized in the United States, put on a secure footing in the 20 teens. That is very valuable for us because I think, as we've discussed, what we the package, why is the United States so attractive for international students? Obviously, the educational experience is key to that, but it's the post-education employment scheme, as they call it in the UK, the OPT program, as we call it in the United States, that makes it really, really attractive for the brightest students from around the world to come. So I think to the extent that businesses can speak out about the importance of international students as talent, international students as pipeline, having that OPT program, I think that really becomes very powerful for us in terms of demonstrating what we offer to the United States and to U.S. competitiveness.
Yeah. No, thank you for that, Amy. I think on that point of documented sort of value, I think there's a lot of numbers that are out there that are available. And I think I mentioned some in my opening remarks. You just mentioned some. Ambassador Block mentioned some. One, though, that always sticks with me is a case that we got involved in where we had a firm that was a Silicon Valley startup, which was without a doubt, it was the industry leader in a certain type of specialized additive manufacturing technology. And the technology was developed by two graduate students out of Stanford that both happened to be Chinese students. So they developed the software, they developed the tech, and then this company was built around them and the tech. And they went home after OPT back to China, and then were unable to get visas to return back to the United States to continue to work at the company despite being sponsored by the company for visas. And after more than 6 months of not being able to get their visas, the company came to us and said, we need your help because the students could very easily reproduce exactly what we do in Shenzhen. And if we don't get them in here, then we are going to lose our market leadership position. We took that to the US government and we're still unable to get them visas. And now the industry leader is in Shenzhen and is not in Silicon Valley. So it's one sort of microcosm of this conflict between the perceived need to protect national security with the need for global competitiveness. And sometimes that's a false dichotomy. But in an era where there's deep national security concerns and imperfect information, I think we can have many more of those types of examples. But in point of fact, the one thing that is clear from talking to our companies and from talking to industry groups is that foreign students, foreign researchers are absolutely a key part of US global competitiveness, and that it is of great national concern for us to resolve these issues in a way that enables the best and brightest to come to America, to our universities, and to work in our companies and to drive American innovation. And again, as the ambassador told us earlier, this is not just a matter of dollars and cents for tuition, but it's US leadership and it's US global competitiveness. So I'd very much like to thank everyone for joining us on the panel today. Would like to thank all of our guests, and in particular would like to thank US CET for co-sponsoring this with USCBC. It was delightful to have you all here. So a warm round of applause, virtual or in real life, for all of our panelists, please. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.